Hi everyone, welcome to SAMA, a program which invites an expert each week to discuss a topic from their area of expertise. This week we are delighted to have Margie Bissinger to teach us how to build strong bones naturally. With age, people with osteoporosis have a higher risk of fractures or bone breaks, even while doing routine activities such as standing and walking. But with good bone health, people can continue to enjoy life to the fullest. In this episode of SAMA, Margie will describe holistic and natural methods to help improve bone health and prevent osteoporosis. Margie is a physical therapist who has worked with clients in the prevention and treatment of osteoporosis for over 20 years. She is the author of Osteoporosis, an exercise guide, which has sold over 100,000 copies. Margie helps people achieve optimal bone and overall health through whole foods, exercise, mind-body relaxation techniques, and happiness training. Goodness knows we all need that. She's a member of the NJ Interagency Council on Osteoporosis and an ambassador to the National Osteoporosis Foundation. Welcome to our show, Margie. It's fantastic to have you with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, what seeded your interest in bone health?
Well, I sort of fell into it. I was working as a physical therapist. My area at the time was musculoskeletal problems, so back, neck pain, and an outpatient clinic. And then a group of doctors started referring their patients to me with osteoporosis. And this is really way back. This is even before the medications were available. So they started sending, and I started seeing things I couldn't believe. People who were well-intentioned and they wanted to help themselves were really doing exercises that actually increased the risk of fractures. And I just thought, wow, this area really needs attention. And so I started getting very involved, both at the state level in New Jersey, where I live, and also nationally. And then I wrote the book on osteoporosis, and I just realized that people needed guidance because they were injuring themselves because they weren't doing exercises properly or doing the right exercises. You know, they didn't know where to turn. And so that's what started getting me involved in it. And then I went beyond and realized that besides, there's more than just exercise. And I have a son who has diabetes, and I saw what happened, that food was such a major part in helping him manage his disease. And so I ended up going back to school and getting trained in nutrition and also becoming a health coach. So I added that piece to it. So that's how I sort of integrated everything into the management of osteoporosis. And that was over 20 years ago. So I've been doing this actually. Yeah.
When you say over 20 years ago, to some people may seem a very long time, but it doesn't to...
It's actually probably 25 years now. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like the life forces were pushing you in that direction because there was a vacant spot just waiting for you to arrive.
Exactly. Yes, it's true. And I'm so happy now that I've gotten involved because there's so much that can be done. And I look at osteoporosis now, you know, not as, oh no, when someone finds out, but it's a good time to reset, to see what's going on in your life and then make the changes. Because when you do things to improve your bones, you do things to improve your whole life. Your whole health gets better. So it ends up being like a silver lining because that's what I found, though, that, you know, it's just one gateway into a person's health.
You mentioned very briefly in the early days that there wasn't any medication for osteoporosis, which I didn't know there was medication for osteoporosis today. What are these drugs that we're talking about?
Yeah. It's in at least in the United States, it's really the standard of care in terms of conventional medical approach to osteoporosis. If they find out that someone has low bone density or osteoporosis, they end up prescribing medication. So that's one of the treatments. That's not my area, but that's one of the treatments in this country. But the good news is that there's so much. I have found that people have done amazing figuring out the root cause of osteoporosis, and also with, there's just so many things that can be done so that people don't have to have the medication.
Right. So you're finding the drugs aren't dealing to the root cause. What do these drugs actually do, Margie?
Well, there's different types of drugs. So there's one class of drugs called, I'm not going to, it could take a very long time, but basically what they do is there's something, the bones are not dead tissue. It's not like you have bones. The bone changes, it's alive. And what happens is something called bone turnover. So you lose a little bone and that's replaced by new bone. So there's cells that help get rid of old bone and there's cells that put new bone on. And that's something that happens every 7 to 10 years, we get a new skeleton. And so it's a good thing. So it keeps our bones nice and healthy. So
Right.
what happens, one of the drugs called the bisphosphonates, what they do, they stop what's called the osteoclasts, which are the cells that help get rid of the old bone. And they sort of stop their activity. So you end up getting, seems like you have more bone. You're not losing bone. They're the cells that destroy the bone. And so, however, it also can affect this bone turnover, which is good, healthy tissue.
Right.
So that's, yeah. So then there's other drugs now that actually can build bone. They work on a different mechanism. So we can go into it. There's a lot of different types of drugs that are available.
Right. Can we go into, please, Margie, into the biology of bones? What are bones? Because most people think of bones as like the framework, the scaffolding, where all the other stuff hangs off, like the organs and our flesh all hangs off bone. So most people think of bone as just being like almost like steel, just something that isn't alive. And you've just described it as being alive. So
yes.
if you can explain what bone really is.
Yes. So the bone is alive. The bone is responsible for so many things. The bone marrow with your white blood cells, your red blood cells. So, it's important for the blood. And the bone also is, it's a storage area. So for example, make sure your body has, like, the calcium in your body has to be regulated. So if something's missing, the bone is like a repository where your body can take it from your bones. And so we want to make sure. So it does a lot of things, and it holds us up and it keeps us strong, and it's very, very important.
Okay. So the bones, if they are like the reservoir of some important nutrients, like calcium, and you don't have an intake of calcium, but your body obviously needs it, your bones presumably will become weaker. Is that a fair?
Yeah. Yes, it could. It could be one of the reasons why. Yes, if your body doesn't have enough, your body can then take from your bones. Absolutely.
Gosh. Okay, so now we're into the nuts and bolts. Osteoporosis, which is what this talk is all about. What on earth can go wrong with such a beautifully balanced system?
Well, what happens with what osteoporosis is, by definition, is porous bones. And so what they're looking at is both the quality and the density of the bones. And what happens is when that's reduced, which is osteoporosis, the bones become fragile and more likely to fracture. So they lose their interconnection, their strength. There's crosslinks in the bone, and that becomes weaker with osteoporosis. So for many reasons, there can be osteoporosis in terms of, there's a lot of risk factors early on. There's that people can have, people who are on steroids, people who smoke, people who have had bad digestion or anorexia. If you haven't gotten the nutrients into your bones, that's a reason that you could be losing bone. Also with menopause, typically women will lose bone because estrogen has a protective effect. And then there's many root causes, inflammation, things that people don't even look at can be causing osteoporosis as well. So lots of different reasons, and there's certain medications that people are on that put them more at risk. So lots of things can happen that you lose your bone, and then it becomes more fragile and likely to break. So that's the problem. The problem also, though, is that it's very, very prevalent. Like, people don't realize, people think, oh, it's not something that happens until I'm older. And most people don't really think about it when they're younger. But the reality is what you do with your bones when you're younger is critical to where your bones are as you age. So for example, 85 to 90% of your bones are you have them by the time in women by 18 and 20 in men. So that's where you have the majority of your adult bone mass when you're younger. And then you go to peak bone until you're around 25 to 30s, where you have the most bone you're going to have in your lifetime. So these years, like puberty and when you are critical for having good habits to build bone. So it's sort of like a bank. You want to make your deposits so that later on, if you need to withdraw some, you have great bone and you're full. And that's really a problem, because most people, especially I worry about today's generation, where they're more sedentary. People are on the computer, they're not exercising, the diets are not great. So there's a lot of, I think, risk factors that can happen later on. So very, very important.
One thing you said surprised me. Now, I was aware that some life habits can cause a reduction in bone density, but smoking, I knew smoking was to blame for a lot of things which aren't so nice, but bone density, that's the least thing I would have expected. How on earth could it affect bone density?
Well, they just found that smokers have significantly reduced bone density. It puts you at risk.
Isn't it remarkable? Because smoking is, well, a lot of people smoke, because it's cool. But if people could sort of extrapolate this, if they could look into the future and see themselves in 40 years, gosh, 40 years, in 40 years' time, and they can see themselves hunched over or weak. Wow, all of a sudden smoking may not be so cool. That is surprising, isn't it? I wonder what the mechanism is behind that. It's quite, I guess it'll be quite complex.
With as well, any type of inflammation in the body is going to affect the bones. Right. It really does. Whatever inflammation in the body can have a significant, because the bones can respond to inflammation. So when we're in an inflamed state, it tends to, everything doesn't work as it should. And so it ends up causing reduced bone density. And so we're not going to digest as much. It's going to affect every organ in our body. And when everything isn't working optimally, if we're not getting all the nutrients. Also, I think smoking reduces the nutrient absorption. I think that's the big thing with the smoking, is that it's going to reduce the calcium. It's going to reduce the minerals that we're getting into our bones. And I think, it's something called micronutrient deficiency. When we don't have these minerals, that's a huge, risk factor and cause of bone loss.
Right. I don't think nicotine is an essential nutrient.
No. No, definitely not.
Okay, so all the factors that we've been discussing until now have been physical things, but osteoporosis, is that a condition or a disease?
Well, it's interesting. It's considered, I personally don't think of it as a disease. I mean, if you look it up, they'll say a disease, but I don't really consider it. I consider it a condition that occurs that we can really improve, and we can do things so that we don't have to lose bone, and that we can even increase our bone. So to me, it's a condition, but if you look it up in textbooks, or if you look it up, they'll call it a disease.
But if it's a disease, one would assume that they'd have some pathogen associated with it. They could say, well, this is microbe XYZ that's causing osteoporosis. I haven't seen any reports as such. Either that, or it could be like an immune or genetic condition, I guess. Are some people more susceptible to osteoporosis if their mother or father had osteoporosis later in life? Are people more susceptible?
Absolutely. If they have genetics, that's certainly one of the risk factors. If your mother had it, yes, it certainly is a risk factor. And it does seem to be familiar that genetics do play a role.
Could it be genetics or epigenetics, where it could be like a environmental thing? If your parents had it, you were brought up in the same environment, so similar nutrients.
Yeah, we don't know. They haven't really studied that in terms of you know, no, they haven't studied that, but it certainly could be. There's just so many things that affect our bones that could have, sure.
How common is osteoporosis?
This is the thing. It's very common. In the world, there's 8.9 million fractures per year due to osteoporosis. So what that means is every 3 seconds, there's a fracture due to osteoporosis. And here's a really horrible statistic. So in the United States, 1 out of 2 women over the age of 50 will sustain a fracture due to osteoporosis in their lifetime. And it's 1 out of 4 men. However, in the world, the United States is worse. In the world, it's 1 out of 3 women and 1 out of 5 men. So it's over 50 will have a fracture due to osteoporosis. So the numbers are huge. And the problem is that when you have a fracture, if you have a hip fracture, the statistics are awful. 25% of people that have a hip fracture will die within the year following that hip fracture. Another 25% will go directly to a nursing home. So it's a big deal. And people, it's such a big deal that the risk of osteoporosis is great, a fracture from osteoporosis is greater than the combined risk for women of uterine, ovarian, and breast cancer. And it's greater than the risk for a man of having prostate cancer. So it's a very big deal, but yet people don't really give it the attention, I think, that it deserves because it's significant.
Well, with these statistics that you're mentioning, I'd say to warrant a bit of attention, one would think. And I wonder, it grabbed your attention so many years ago. It seems like the focus was not on prevention at that time, it would seem. Now, if I was if someone was a teenager, okay, these are what you've mentioned just a little bit earlier, were the formative years for our calcium bank. We've got to build our body up with very strong bones so that they can last during the decay years, for want of a better word. So what can a young person do to ensure that their bones are healthy?
Okay, I think there's a couple different things. Well, number one, exercise. Exercise is absolutely essential because the bones respond to the forces placed upon them. And so if a person is not exercising, I mean, they've shown this even with people who go in space and people who, don't have forces placed upon them. If they're bedridden, they'll lose bone. So we want jumping. You want forces on the bone. So just to be very active, do jumping, do running, do activities that you're getting all sorts of different forces, like hopscotch, one leg, everything. You're getting forces on your bones, basketball, things that are weighted, so being active, I think, is critical. That's huge. And, they have found, like, for example, if someone just went swimming, that's all they did, there's not enough force in swimming to increase your bone density. So I think swimming's great. I'm personally a swimmer, but you want to do all sorts of things that are getting force in a couple ways. So, jumping, anything that's going, it's like weight-bearing forces against gravity. So through your bones against gravity. And then resistance, just using resistance through your life. And I think if kids are active, that will be great. And as they get older, I think strength training is really important, and just all sorts, whatever exercise they like. It has to be, they have to like it. So I think exercise, is and good nutrition. Unfortunately, so many teenagers, and as I said, those are the formative years. What you do at that age is going to affect your bones later on. So and it's not really talked about. It's something, I'm on this New Jersey, as you mentioned, Interagency Council on osteoporosis. And as a state, we're working on actually educating pediatricians and just the family practice medicine and, different practitioners to really look at people and make sure that their habits are conducive to stronger bones later on. So in terms of just eating a really good diet, having lots of vegetables and plants and, everything. You want protein, but you want your calcium and your magnesium. So I think if you're eating just a very good plant-based, as well as, protein in your diet, and not junk food and not processed food, I think, that's a place to start. And then, yeah.
Oh no, please continue.
Yeah. So I think the diet's critical because, I'm sure, as you know, so many people really live on soda and junk food, and they're not getting the nutrients that the bones need to really, be strong. And, people who've had anorexia are significant, risk for osteoporosis later on.
Really?
So, yeah. And then the third thing, which I really believe in, and this is not something that people talk about much at all, is stress. And we live in such a stressful society, and kids today are so stressed. And it's not that we can always get rid of our stress, but we need to learn how we can handle it and techniques so that it doesn't, throw us over. And the reason that that's important is because stress and your body's stress hormone is cortisol, and that actually has been shown to reduce the bone building cells. So often people will come in and they're they want to know exactly what exercises to do, what should I eat, but they don't realize that all this stress really has negative effects on their bones. So I think that that's the other piece, and I think that's just important in life as well, that people need to learn. When you can learn these techniques when you're young, your life just becomes so much better.
I'd hazard a guess that perhaps 85-90% of the people that we're watching this video will be living in a city.
Mm-hmm.
And a good proportion of those people will be living in an apartment,
mm-hmm.
and they won't be able to go out and do this, just go out for a run in the park or somewhere. It's so much harder. What can you do if you're living in a city environment which is inherently very unhealthy?
Well, you can do so much. You can do jumping jacks. There's so many things you can do. I'm also a very big fan of Qigong. First of all, I think you have to love your exercise.
Well,
I really do.
If you don't love it, you don't continue, do you?
You don't continue. And I also teach happiness. And I'm a big believer that you want these happiness chemicals. You don't want to be, I'm just doing this, I have to do it for my bones, I hate this. There's no reason. You can find exercises that you love. But sure, if you're in this, you just take a little area and you can do videos if you want. You can have some weights. You can do squats. You can do one leg stands. You can do a million things. You can do, as I said, jumping jacks. You can do jumps. You can, again, every level, depending upon the state of a person's bones. If someone has significant osteoporosis, we might modify some things. But in general, there's no limit to what you can do. You can walk up and down the stairs in your apartment also. So I think there's absolutely no excuse. I live in New Jersey, but all of my kids live in New York City, and there's just no excuse. There's so much you can do, even if you're in a small area. So I think that regardless of where anyone is, there's so many different resources to find out, good exercises, or just put music on and dance. I think dance, not that, again, if someone, a good exercise program is you want some weight bearing and you want aerobics,
right.
But also twice a week, I would say that twice a week to do specific strength training exercises if you can. And you want to make sure that you're getting the areas that are most prone to osteoporosis, which would be the spine, the hip, and the wrist. And so what I see typically is people do a lot of things, on their arms, their legs, but they don't do a lot on their back, and the back strengthening. So doing things like you're on your stomach, lifting up, really working the back muscles are so very important. But it doesn't matter. Even if you have a little bit of space, you can do a lot.
Now, you mentioned at the start of the program that some people were doing exercises incorrectly.
Yes.
So not all exercises is good.
No, and that's what I was seeing. So a couple things. Well,
Yes.
first of all, I think it's critical to do things in good posture. And that's another problem in today's day and age. Because of the cell phone, what's called text neck, this is what I see all the time, that people are, they have their heads bent forward half the day, their shoulders are rounded, and they're showing the spines of young children are actually changing the curve. So the actual shape of the vertebrae is changing because they're texting so much. And so this position is a horrible, horrible position for everything.
Right.
It causes impingement in the shoulder. It causes headaches. And when you're rounding out your back, it causes problems as well. So one thing is the posture, but the big thing with osteoporosis, if you have osteoporosis, you do not want to do any rounding exercises, or they're called flexion. So forward bending, where people are rounded. And the reason is that the fractures are on the front of the vertebrae, the front of the spine. And so that when you bend forward, all the forces are on the front of the spine.
Right.
And so it puts excess force and fulcrums in an area that's already weakened.
Yes.
So there was a study done many years ago at the Mayo Clinic, and it was a small study, but they looked at people doing different exercises, and they looked at people who were doing only forward bending versus people doing extension, backward bending. And they looked at fractures over a 6-year period of time, and they found that the people who were only doing forward bending had an 89% fracture rate, versus people doing backward bending had a 16% fracture rate. Can you imagine? So that study will never be repeated, but that's something that people need to know if they have osteoporosis. And it's not that you can't do exercises, but you don't round your spine. You bend from the hips like you would do in a squat and keep your normal curve. Does that make sense? So
Yes.
you don't want to do anything with rounding. And so that's one of the big precautions. But then people say, well, what about yoga and Pilates and all these great things? I'm a huge believer in yoga and Pilates, but you just have to do the modifications. You just have to modify. And then the other precautions would be extremes of motion. So like complete rotation or side bending. So you don't want to go to the extremes because that's too much torsion if you do have osteoporosis. So I would say, you back off like 20%. And if you're in a class that's doing yoga or Pilates, you let hopefully the instructor has some experience with osteoporosis, but you just don't want anyone to ever give you overpressure, or you don't want to do anything that causes, those extremes of movement.
Okay. Let's say I'll throw this question to you. It's a good one. This person's being diagnosed with osteoporosis. If they eat the right foods, they do stretching exercises, forwards and back. They do impact exercises. With those things, osteoporosis can be reversed?
Okay, it depends on many things.
Yes.
Yes, they have shown that you can improve. The key is, are you going to go back to where you were, when you were 30?
Right.
That's, but the thing is, yes, they've shown you can improve with exercise, but you also, what I found is really important, what is the root cause of the osteoporosis? Okay. Are you deficient? Are you not getting enough magnesium? Is there a deficiency in vitamin D? Do you have some kind of micronutrient deficiency? Is there something missing that you're not getting in your diet? So that's, you need to look. I think micronutrients are really important. I think also, what is causing inflammation? Is there something in your body that's causing overall inflammation, which can be affecting your bones? Also, in terms of digestion, and I see this all the time, so many people have digestive issues they don't realize. So it's not just eating the food, it's, are you absorbing the nutrients from the food that you eat? And it's sort of like, you have a hose and you're watering your plants. Well, if someone steps on the hose, you're not going to get the water. So if that's in your body, if there's a kink in your digestive system and you're not getting the nutrients into the bones, that's going to be a big problem. So I think you need to address these root causes and figure out what's going on. And sometimes there's other causes that your parathyroid isn't working properly. There could be other causes why you might be losing bone, or your thyroid, or your medication. So there's different things. So I think you need to work with someone and figure out the root cause. And sometimes, so I think if you figure out the root cause, I think the exercise is very important, and the eating, and just sometimes people have issues with their hormones. So I think the comprehensive point is you figure out what may be causing the bone and do these things. Yes, and I've seen great results when people improve their eating and do the exercises, that people have at least maintained bone, and if not, increased it. So I've seen great results, and I find that really, really encouraging, that there's so much that can be done. And also with the stress, that's a huge part. What I do with people is, really work on stress reduction, but also, as I said, I teach happiness. And they've done studies, believe it or not, showing that life satisfaction and happiness is correlated with increased bone density. So it sort of all goes together.
Well, it could be that you're more happy because your bones are more dense.
But you don't know. The thing is, you have no idea. That's the thing with osteoporosis. It's silent. You have absolutely no idea what's going on. It's not as though it hurts or that you get any warning signs until there's a fracture. And then, or if you got a bone density test. But it's different. It's not like other things. I think that's sort of one of the hard things, that when I'm dealing with people with osteoporosis, it's not like when you work with someone with digestion. Immediately if they get better. You don't really know if the osteoporosis improving until they get another bone density test, if that makes sense.
Well, it's kind of scary, because you can live too close to a ripe old age, and then all of a sudden, wham, a breakage reveals that your bones are have got the strength of paper. And you don't, that could be catastrophic. You if you've lived a healthy life, but you've suddenly found that your bones are low density.
Well, usually though, most people, it's interesting, because here in the United States, they say by 65, you should get tested. I really think any woman, postmenopausal, or if you have risk factors, if you have a family history, or if you've broken bones throughout your life, that's a huge risk factor is if you've had other fractures. But, people are tested, and so that they can see what's going on in terms of, they're tested earlier than they get a fracture. So at least once you find out, there's a lot you can do. But I really believe if people just do the right things for their bones, which is good for their bodies anyway, that we can really, prevent osteoporosis, and especially if we start younger.
So what you're saying is there's no need to fight a fire if there's no fire there. If you eat proper foods and do exercising, there doesn't need to be the
and really builds up when you're younger. I think so. I do believe that. I mean, well, time will tell, and I don't think this generation is really been super active and eating great. So, we'll have to see. But I think that there's a lot of hope for this. And I think that there's, again, I think the root cause is important. And I think digestive issues are a big deal too, because what I see with the younger population is people just accept the fact that they're bloated, or they're constipated, or they have gas, as though that's normal. But that shouldn't be normal. There's that's not normal, and that needs to be addressed.
Right, absolutely. And with the most people being to some degree sensitive to wheat and wheat products, and the health supplement they add to the wheat, which is glyphosate, then it's just exaggerating the problem. It's just making it so much worse.
It's very interesting, because I also have a podcast, and it's called Happy Bones, Happy Life. And one of the guests that I'm going to have on is going to talk about glyphosate. And some of the research shows that the glyphosate reduces manganese, and that's very important for the bones. And to me, right, glyphosate, is a huge, huge, huge problem with everything. But I think also it's a big problem for the bones. and I think that it's something that we need to, definitely deal with. Now, I mean, I think that's responsible for a lot of health problems, but absolutely with the bones. And the interesting thing, what I've seen in my practice that you talk about, wheat, is that there are people who have issues with gluten. And once they stopped gluten, it was interesting. So I'm thinking of one woman in particular. She had been on medication, actually. This was before I saw her. She told me the story. She'd been on medication for osteoporosis and didn't help. And then one of her friends was going gluten-free. And she also had arthritis. Not that, she was like early 50s. And so one of her friends was going gluten-free. She said, what the heck? And so when she went gluten-free, all of a sudden, she didn't have any pain in her joints. Her arthritis completely went away. And then the next time she did her bone density significantly increased. So I've seen a couple people like that. I think gluten's a big issue. They know gluten's an issue. They know celiac disease. Anyone with celiac, that's a huge risk for osteoporosis. But what's interesting is, and it's improving, but people really are only tested for celiac. But the majority of people don't have celiac, and they may have other issues with gluten that's not celiac. So I think it's important for people to be tested for the gluten, because that does have we've been seeing that there's a big issue, and it can contribute to bone loss. So, that's, again, it's more inflammation as well.
Historically, people have said, well, if you want strong bones, you've got to drink more milk. Is that true?
No. In the cultures that drink the most milk, they have the highest incidence of osteoporosis. So that milk is not the panacea. And there have been, there's all sorts of issues with milk. Certain people have problems with the casein in milk, or the lactose. And so they definitely can't have milk. And also milk has so many hormones in it, especially if, you're drinking non-organic. That can affect you as well. So the thing with milk is, more is not better. That's certainly not where I'd get my calcium from, the milk. And, again, a lot of people have issues with dairy. So I prefer getting it from leafy green vegetables. That's like a great place to get calcium. There's other places, but no, milk is not the end all be all for bone.
You've mentioned, leafy green vegetables. What else is high in calcium? If you want to...
Any fish with bones. So like sardines are really high in calcium. And then wild caught salmon has calcium. Some of the nuts have calcium. The nuts such as almonds have calcium in them. So I'm trying to think. Yeah. There's lots of things that you can get calcium from.
Now, one thing which really intrigues me, Margie, you teach an online course, Happy Bones, Happy Life. It's really sort of two questions I'd like to ask. First of all, why is happiness so important? And how can that reflect on the health of our bones?
Yes. Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, I have found in my career, because way back, so when I first started practicing as a physical therapist, I had gone through a bad situation, and my patients were saying to me, "Oh, you're so happy. What do you do?" And I thought, if they only knew what I'd gone through, they wouldn't think I was so happy. Yes. But the truth was that I really was happy. And I realized at that moment that happiness is not something that's based on your external circumstances. Happiness is an internal job. It's within. And when I learned that, and I was working with chronic pain patients, back pain, neck pain. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to just start teaching some of the habits. Now I call them happiness habits. But at the time, some of the things that helped me get through my situation to my patients and see what happens. And it was miraculous, where neck pain, back pain started getting better much quicker than it had before. And you started seeing, because these people were really miserable. They were so unhappy. And you started seeing joy return. So early on, now that was around 35 years ago. And I've been doing this now with every person I work with. Everybody gets happiness training because I saw how powerful it is. So the reason is, they've done studies. Happier people live 9 years longer. Happier people, the immune system, the there's huge reduction in their colds, and there's new, I can go on and on. But with the bones, they've actually done studies, with the bones showing that life satisfaction and happiness is correlated with increased bone density. They've even did a study recently about people's social, like social stresses, that people who had reduced social stresses had increased bone density. So, even if you were stressed with your social situation, that would reduce your bone density. So I think it just affects every aspect. And the cortisol, the stress hormone, obviously when you're happier, you're not going to be as stressed out. And the cortisol, can reduce the osteoblasts, which are the bone building cells. So there's a true reason that this is happening. But I've just found that it's amazing. It's amazing how happiness affects every part of your life and your health. And it's really, then I also teach a complete happiness course too. So I teach the bone course.
Yeah.
And I teach a course that has nothing to do with bones, just like teaching people how they can increase their base level of happiness, because you can. That's the best news. And once you do, it's really incredible, all the health benefits that occur.
What do you think is the most important advice you can give someone that's carrying the burden of gloom? They haven't got.
Okay. Yes, I think the best thing to do is, there's many things that we can do, but if someone's carrying, as you say, the burden of gloom, you can start rewiring your brain for positivity, because we are wired for negativity. And I think that stems from way back in the caveman days. We had to be more aware if there was a tiger lurking, we had to be run from a tiger, than if someone said something nice to us, because there were real dangers back then.
Right.
It's different today, but that's how we're wired. So think about it. If you get 20 compliments and one person says something that's not very nice, what do you take in and what do you absorb? People dwell on the negative. And that's how most people are. So it's sort of like the negative sticks to you and the positives just, you just let them go. So the first step, I think, is working on your thoughts, because your thoughts create your reality. And if you wake up in the morning, this is awful, that's awful, my shoulder hurts, oh my God, my bones, this is just terrible, that's going to be the environment that you're in. But people do that. I'm sure people are listening saying, yep, that's me. But you can change that. That's the beauty. So the first step one with this gloom is that to sort of look at what good exists, what is working or what good exists. And during your day, be a detective and see and start looking for the good, because what you focus on grows. And so if you focus on what's working and things that are good, guess what? You get more of them. And just to take this even a little deeper, what I like to do is, so you're a detective, you look for the good. And when something happens that's good. So let's say someone gives you a compliment. They say to you, I love your podcast. Instead of like, oh, it's nothing. Say, you absorb it, take it in for like 20 seconds. I worked really hard on this. Thank you so much. I so appreciate that. You absorb it. Or you see a sunset, take it in. Don't just let it go. And then the last thing is that, and then when you do have these negative thoughts, and it's not to push away negative thoughts, and it's not to live like a Pollyanna that everything's wonderful. That's not this at all. But it's just to start really appreciating the positives. And so, when you have the negative thought, then counteract it with 3 positive but true things as well. So that's the first way. I would start with your thoughts. And I think it's amazing how much that can start making you feel better. And it just, you just start gradually doing things. But I think the negative thoughts are just so detrimental. And that's what I was seeing with the patients too. When I was working that, if you're sitting there, oh, my back pain, or oh, this, it just magnifies it versus, I walked better today, or whatever it be. Even it's small wins, the more you start celebrating them and focusing on what's working, the more things will start working.
Do you ever recommend someone to change their environment? Because
Sure.
sometimes they might be in a bad living in the space. They're with people they don't enjoy being around.
That is such a good question because it's contagious. Absolutely, it's contagious. Someone's negativity is, and sometimes, and also we have a field around us. You can walk into a room and you can feel it.
Oh, absolutely.
And you really want, and it affects tremendously who you're around. So it's very important. That's actually a whole class. We talk about relationships and who you're surrounding yourself with. And sometimes you have to evaluate, your surroundings. And I mean, sometimes you can change them, which is great if you realize, how it's making you feel. And I think sometimes just to stop and see, how does it make you feel, being around. And then, but sometimes you can't. It could be a relative or something else. And then where you need to do boundaries. But I think that's a great point you brought up because, sure, you're like, they say the 5 people that surround you, that's really going to affect you. And so, yes, absolutely, to really look at your environment and see how it's making you feel. Yeah, good point.
It's interesting how even, stress, environment, something it can be, it is kind of physical, but it's technically not physical, can have an effect on bones, which is very, which are a structural component of your body and so important.
I think stress has an effect on everything. I just think it's a robber of happiness. It's a robber, it affects your immune system. I mean, most people get sick after they've been under stress because it really reduces and also it's like it pulls the trigger. You may have genetic predisposition for certain things, but then if you're under tremendous stress, that's going to, pull the trigger. So then things all of a sudden you start experiencing them. So stress is huge. And the thing about stress is that it's not that, people's lives are stressful. Life can be stressful. And that's, there's nothing we can do about that. We all have situations in our life, but it's resilience. That's the key. It's how resilient are you? Where the two, just think about traffic. 2 people are in the same traffic. One person's ready to pull their hair out and just destroy themselves. And the other person is like, using it to think about something else that they're doing, or, so it's not really the situation. I think part of that is taking care of yourself. If you build up yourself so that you do habits that you're not stressed out, or that when these things happen, you have the resilience. You can, if the wave's not going to take you over, you can bounce back. And I spend a lot of time with people I work with on this because I really do believe it's a big component. I think most of the people I see, the majority, I would say at least 90%, have high stress levels. And so, I guess that's also in the world today, but the good news is there's things that you can do to really completely change this. And I knew, I decided to take, this is years ago, I decided that there was a class near me, mindfulness meditation. It was the John Kabat-Zinn class, and it was 8 weeks. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to take this. And on the first day we didn't do anything. The second day of class, I got a speeding ticket on the way to meditation. Can you imagine? And so that hit me in the head that I wasn't practicing what I was preaching and teaching everyone. So at that point, and that was around 10 years ago, I took this so seriously, made it such a priority in my life. And it's worked. It really works as long as I do.
You got a speeding ticket on the way to slow down and meditate. Yeah.
But it was good. It was a good thing because sometimes you get the messages you need to get. And it was important, right? But it was good for me because I took it so seriously. And since that time, like, to me, my daily practices are non-negotiable. Like, they're just same with my exercise. It's just something I do, and I know I feel so much better. And I've changed my stress level so much. It's amazing.
Your analogy and examples of 2 people waiting at the traffic lights. One is very stressed out and the other one's very relaxed. You'll always find the person who's stressed out is behind the person that's relaxed. Because they haven't moved on. Now, I'd like to focus at the end of our summer here. And Carmela, I hope you've got a note from your mum saying why you're late. I want to focus on solutions. Now, someone has got osteoporosis. They're thinking, gosh, there's nothing I can do. Well, what can they do? What are the emergency things they can do? The things that will see rapid changes. What things can they do to see the slower changes? If we can just summarize possibly.
Sure. Okay. So there's no such thing as rapid changes. Okay. So there's nothing you can do to see, really rapid changes because, bone, it just doesn't happen right away. Okay. But people have seen improvements, even in a year. So it's not like, a digestive issue where, oh, you know what, 2 weeks later you feel much better. But I think starting the exercise program, and I'm a very big believer. If someone has, if you have the ability to see a physical therapist or someone, that would be my absolute first choice. Okay. Physical therapist who, if someone has osteoporosis, who really can make sure your posture's right, make sure you're doing all the right exercises, or an exercise instructor that's had training in osteoporosis. So you want to work with someone that knows what they're doing. Okay. But I think, getting more active, doing, both strength training twice a week and doing also, weight bearing exercises, as well as balance. Balance is huge because as we get older, if we don't use it, we lose it. So the exercise is critical. I think really, making sure that you have a good, healthy diet, and that I could spend 8 hours talking about. But just briefly, if not, supplements, but I think can I just say one thing? I don't want to go over the time, but the calcium, what I see is there's too much, people are getting too much calcium.
Really?
Because they're getting calcium in their diet. And then oftentimes the doctors are also telling them, take 1,200 milligrams of calcium. So, they're getting too much. I see that they're taking supplements and they're also having it in their diet. So in terms of calcium, more is not better. So make sure that the most you get is 1,200 from combined, supplements and food. And I personally prefer food, but, so make sure. And then besides the calcium, there's a lot of different things, but magnesium is critical. And also vitamin K2 is very, very important. Okay. And so I think in terms of, but I think, getting those vegetables and really eating healthy diet, you want enough protein. Protein is important. So you want to make sure that you have protein in your diet. And vitamin C is important. So there's, but a good, healthy diet, and get rid of, here's fast things, the sugar. Sugar reduces the absorption of calcium and magnesium.
Wow,
it's just,
really?
Yeah, it's the worst, right? So you want to get rid of the sugar and the processed food right away. And then just start. You can start with deep breathing, start one thing but again, I would work with a physician and be evaluated also for your bones. It's not as though, or whoever your healthcare practitioner is, I'd make sure that you get a bone density test. And if you have risk factors, get evaluated for sure. And then, with your posture, there's things that you can do as well. You want to make sure that not to be sitting rounded in terms of your posture.
Right.
So, there's so many things, but in a nutshell, to get started, I would say just to make the exercise and the good nutrition.
And you will see results? Do you have some people that follow all your guidelines but don't see improvements?
Truly, pretty much most people that I've been working with, again, there are people that have to figure out the root cause. So sometimes there have been people that have had an issue with their parathyroid or different other things. We need to also, that's why I work with practitioners to also figure out, or heavy metals, they have mercury toxicity. There's many things. So you need to get to the root cause. But yes, I've had great results that people have been able to at least maintain. And then they, as long as they're doing everything. Yeah, that's why to me it's exciting and that's why I try to get the word out, because you can improve. There's so much you can do. And I don't think people realize that, I really don't.
Carmela Walker's passed the comment that she uses boron in small amounts with people. Now she's mentioning the bone pain lessons within 3 days, but does boron help with osteoporosis?
Yeah, Boron's very necessary. Yes, that's
Very
excellent.
necessary.
Hmm.
Right.
Yes, that's an important nutrient.
What foods have got boron naturally as part of it?
That's interesting because most people take boron supplement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what has boron in it. That's a good question.
Hold on that one.
Yeah, hold that one.
We don't expect you to have all the answers. It's so interesting to talk with. Now you've got a truly holistic point of view, because you don't just focus on bones and the chemical, the constituents of the bone and the functions of the bone, but you're talking about the body as well. We've touched on meditation, the role of happiness, and the role of the hormone balance in our body. And I really love that, how you've taken several steps back, and you look at the larger picture, and you find the root cause of the problem.
And I see that, though. I have to tell you, maybe being a physical therapist and working on muscle for so many years, is that the mind is not separate from the body. And there have been numerous people who maybe even something as simple as forgiveness, they've been holding on to something their whole life and haven't forgiven people. And once they do that, all of a sudden their muscles get better. This is what I saw for years, just working with chronic pain, that all these concepts, but I believe they affect the bones, everything as well. So that's been my approach to treating everything for, as I said, it's been really been 35 years that I've been teaching happiness. long time to patients.
Margie Bissinger, expert on happiness and bones and health. Thank you so much for coming onto our show, Margie. It's been a real blessing for us to have you on. It's I love your attitude to health. I love the way that you approach things, and I love your positive energy that just reeks from you. You're full of bubbles.
Oh, well, thank you. Oh, thank you. Well, it's been really fun. Yeah.
I normally ask the experts to finish on a positive note, but really I can't think of any negatives. You've filled the whole summer with solutions. So osteoporosis isn't a sentence as such. It's a condition that can be resolved with the right mental attitude, the right doing the right things for your body. It's been fantastic having you on, Margie. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed being here with you as well. So thank you for having me.
Well, this concludes our summer for this week. Take care, everybody. Keep on passing the love forwards, even to those who you don't love. And believe you me, I find it just as hard as you do, but I just try my best, okay? Goodbye, everybody. Take care.